Hi, I'm Judy Tayebji. Thank you very much for joining us today, and a special thank you to those of you who phone in to participate in the debate. I'm really looking forward to today's debate. Today we're looking under the heading of Aboriginal issues. We plan to bring you something on Gustafson Lake. We've not forgotten about it. We also want to talk about the Sechelt Indian government, which is under development right now. And we've brought you two specials on the BC Treaty Commission. Today we're finally bringing you the show on the Nisga'a deal. And this is something that was signed about a year and a half ago, but is currently still being negotiated. We want to give you some background on the Nisga'a deal. Many people say it's particularly significant, especially right now. And we also have two people who are going to debate the issue about whether or not to have a referendum. But first, let's take a look at the background.
If we fail to deal with the issues now in an honorable and respectful way, we will have the courts impose settlements and we will continue to have economic uncertainty.
When British Columbia joined Confederation, we undertook a legal obligation to our Aboriginal people. Under the Royal Proclamation and international law, we must sign treaties or negotiate settlements.
First Nations people were never conquered, and neither did we buy their land, and neither did we try to essentially extinguish rights through treaties. In British Columbia, because it was a crown colony, it was under a governorship, and we essentially had a coexistence through that governorship, quite separate and quite distinct from what we have seen in the other provinces.
Only a handful of treaties were ever signed in BC, most of them on southern Vancouver Island. The remaining bands continue to ask for negotiations. But this was difficult because until the middle of this century, Aboriginal people had no right to vote or even to sue the government. However, the government continued to have a legal obligation to settle, which led to the formation of the BC Treaty Commission in 1990. This in itself has been controversial, as it is costing all parties millions of dollars at the same time that social issues continue to plague reserves. Some worry that the discussions could take years or even decades and bleed resources from healthcare and education funds.
For every dollar of provincial financial cost, we can expect $3 of total financial benefit into the province. It projects that BC's net financial benefit would be roughly $4 billion.
One of the most significant negotiations is that of the Nisga'a people who live in west central BC in the area of New Ayansh. Their negotiations are outside the treaty process, and last year they signed an agreement in principle with both governments.
This dream that we had, that our forefathers had, is now a reality.
Most Aboriginal and constitutional observers are watching the progression of the Nisga'a deal very closely, as they could be the first Aboriginal band in the province to sign a treaty in modern times. This has been a controversial process with protests by Nisga'a and non-Nisga'a people.
Do not sign on the dotted line because the Kincolith people have disagreed with this.
Last year's agreement in principle was signed with great fanfare by representatives from the federal government, the Nisga'a leadership, and the provincial government. But some people have concerns over the long-term impact of the treaty.
We're in favor of a speedy resolution of these issues because certainty is very important to our industry. But all we're asking for is to have some meaningful input such that when these agreements are arrived at, that it's going to be something that's going to be good for all British Columbians.
Still others are worried that there isn't enough public support to sign treaties, and so the problem that has been around for over 100 years may still be around 100 years from now.
This is your last chance. If you think you have a problem now with our people, in 30 years from now, you will have a crisis.
And so this is a very important debate. The question we're asking today is whether or not you support a referendum to give the government a mandate before they sign either the treaty or specifically the Nisga'a Treaty. And we're looking at that deal. We have two guests and we'll be taking your calls after a quick break. And we'll take your calls to this number.
Guitar components, exquisitely crafted in British Columbia. The fine-grained Sitka spruce provided by Macmillan Bloedel, making the most of a renewable resource.
This fall, discover the film that will be remembered and loved forever. The critics agree, 7 years in Tibet will touch your heart.
I would like to learn about the world you come from.
Turn! 4 stars, inspiring and unforgettable. A mesmerizing motion picture epic. Brad Pitt gives an Oscar-caliber performance. 7 years in Tibet opens everywhere Friday.
Thrifty foods, flowers, and more.
Uncle Ben's converted rice, a good alternative to potatoes. It's a good staple in your diet. It's good for you.
Uncle Ben's classic recipe is terrific.
A little jazzier, a little nicer than just plain rice.
I like pasta, any kind of pasta.
Smiles in the aisle for you. Thrifty Foods.
Welcome to the ocean.
Dreams last for so long.
Start your workday with 98 minutes of music commercial-free.
You'll be blessed.
The Ocean, FM 98.5.
I'm everything I am because you love me. I only want to be with you.
Victoria's at-work choice, The Ocean.
Listen.
Since we know we have to settle with Aboriginal people, the question is how and who should be doing the deciding? How much public input should there be? Does the government have a mandate already to sign a treaty, or should there be a referendum? These are some of the questions we're going to be addressing today. We have 2 guests with us in the studio. We have, first of all, Martin Brown, you're with the Citizens' Voice on Native Claims.
That's right.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. And then we have Frank Cassidy. Now, you're a professor at UVic for Public Administration.
Yes.
You've also written quite a few books on Aboriginal treaties and this whole issue. Just before we get into the discussion, we wanted to give people an idea of what the agreement in principle is. Now remember, an agreement in principle is something that is signed before you go to a treaty. So the Nisga'a deal is an agreement between the federal government, the Nisga'a people, and the province of British Columbia. It's a deal that has taken over 110 years to get to its current state. The agreement in principle is not a treaty, it is the potential terms for one, and there's currently no date for a treaty signing. The Nisga'a negotiations are outside the BC Treaty Commission process, but may be the formula for the approximately 50 treaties under negotiation through this commission. The Nisga'a will own about 1,930 square kilometers of land in the Lower Nass Valley, including 4 villages, as part of this deal. There are no private lands included. The Nisga'a people will receive $190 million, 175.5 of this from the federal government and $14.5 million from the provincial government. Tax-free status for Aboriginal people will be phased out over time, as will the application of the Indian Act. And Nisga'a Indian reserves will be eliminated. The Criminal Code, the Constitution of Canada, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms will apply to the Nisga'a. Existing legal interests, such as rights of way, trap lines, and guide outfitter licenses will continue as they are. The Nisga'a may purchase part of a forest license, but are subject to the Forest Act, and the province will continue to maintain parks, ecological reserves, and roads through the Nisga'a land. The terms of the treaty will be phased in over time. I'm going to start with you, Martin, giving that sort of overview. Why is there a citizen's voice on Native claims?
Well, first let me preface it by saying I'm glad you noticed that it's an agreement in principle. It's not a legally binding document, so we don't even have a final agreement. So there's a long way yet from a treaty, a formally legally binding treaty.
Right.
Why are we here? Essentially what we think is that all British Columbians deserve a much greater say, a lot more input into the treaty process than they've had. We believe all Aboriginal people will have at least 2 opportunities to have a direct say about their treaties. They get a vote, first of all. Before the negotiators even get to the table, they're asked, what should we negotiate? What are the basic principles and elements we should be negotiating on your behalf? And they vote on that.
Within the band? Within
the bands. And all Aboriginal people have that, and that's as it should be. And they'll also have a vote on the treaties when they're concluded. We're saying all British Columbians, the other 97% of us who are not Aboriginal, should have at least one similar opportunity to vote on the basic elements and principles that are going to be reflected in all the treaties. And we believe this Nisga'a deal, it will be the precedent, and it will be, we think, a blueprint, a model for other treaties to emulate.
Now, I have to put this to you because in my discussions with some of the cabinet ministers before the show aired, I said, well, you know, we're talking about whether or not it should be a referendum. And they said, well, in the last provincial election, the Nisga'a deal was on the table, the agreement in principle had been signed, and we became government, and therefore we have a mandate to sign the deal as a treaty.
Well, first of all, the government has no mandate to go forward on this issue because, in fact, it will affect all of our constitutional rights as Canadians and as British Columbians. And indeed, this government was elected with about 38% of the vote. Over 60% of the population didn't vote for the government. And on an issue of this importance, this consequence to all of us as citizens, we believe there should be at least one chance to have a vote, one direct opportunity to have a say.
Okay, I'm going to bring Frank Cassidy into this. I want to really thank you for joining us because I actually, it was sort of last minute trying to find someone who was an expert in this. What do you have to say about this? Because you're on the opposing side of this. If the government says they have a mandate and the citizens' voice say they don't, what's your position?
Well, I think that essentially there are ample opportunities, and there should be ample opportunities for British Columbians to learn about the Nisga'a Treaty and to state their preferences. We have a democratic system. We have a government that was duly elected according to that system. The Nisga'a Agreement in Principle, as noted, has been public for well over a year. People have had a much greater opportunity to look at this agreement than almost anything else that's been before the public. Recently this summer, an agreement was signed with Alcan. I didn't see the amount of public scrutiny of that agreement. Let's compare what's happened with the Nisga'a Treaty to date with the free trade agreement. I think there should be a democratic review, and I think there is being a democratic review. This has been very much done in public, and it still hasn't been concluded. There'll be a vote in the legislature. It seems to me there's a lot of ample opportunities for British Columbians to learn about this and to express their viewpoints.
Okay, I can tell you want to respond to that, and go ahead.
Well, indeed. I think that one of the key things to remember, the Premier of this province, running in the last election in '96, promised that if this deal wasn't acceptable to a majority of British Columbians, it would be changed. He led us to believe that it's not a fait accompli, it's not a done deal, and if changes are needed, they'll be made. Then we had a committee of all the MLAs of the legislature represented, went around and listened to British Columbians for the better part of a year. The two opposition parties, representing 51% of the votes in this province, concluded that fundamental changes must be made to this deal to make it acceptable to most British Columbians.
Well,
and I'm telling you,
you're talking about the paper that was for the Select Standing Committee where there was a majority report and a minority report. And I mean, basically, the government said they liked it, and the opposition party said they didn't.
Yeah, but let's remember, the opposition parties represent 51% of the
Yeah, but they lost the
voters
election. I mean, I'm on the. I know you were with the Reform Party.
Frank's point is that there has to be consultation. People have to be brought in on the decision, and we agree. And we think the way you do that best is by having a vote.
Okay.
But wait a second. Let's get the record straight. There was no indication in that report, in the majority report, that there be fundamental changes to the Nisga'a Agreement in Principle. There was an indication that there be some changes, but let's not mislead people. There was no indication in the majority report.
In the NDP part.
In the majority government report. Whether you like it or not, there is a government of British Columbia. It is elected according to our Constitution. That is our constitutionally approved government. That government struck a committee of the legislature, and the majority of that committee said that this treaty, by and large, was good for all British Columbians.
Okay, and we really have to go to the phones because the lines are jammed, and I'm sure that we're going to hear from people about how they feel. We're going to start with Barry in Vancouver. Hi, Barry.
Hi, Judy. How are you?
Fine, thanks. Go ahead. I'm ducking the bullets.
Okay, the people in British Columbia should get a right to a referendum to decide on this treaty, and I think that the simple reason is that, as both those gentlemen have pointed out, the NDP is in power, but with 39% of the vote, and also it's a very significant amount of land. We're talking about, you know, this 1,930 hectares or acres.
Square kilometers.
You know, that's a tremendous amount of land. And one of the other complaints that I have, I do believe we should all get a right to vote on it. And the other thing is, and I think this is sort of the unspoken thing, that where in British Columbia have the Native Indians demonstrated the ability to manage their affairs in a sensible fashion.
Oh boy.
You know, I mean, it's sort of a...
Well, I'm going to stop you there, Barry, because I don't think they're still under the Indian Act, so I don't know that it's fair to say they've ever had a chance. But anyway, I'll let the guests answer your question, because it's talking about a lot of land and a lot of implications. So.
Well, Judy, let me say, first of all, that what's the point of having a all-party committee of the legislature go around if you don't listen to what half of the members on that committee have to say?
Well, but having said that, Martin, we do have to realize that in this particular House, it's about as bipolar as you can get, and nothing the government does is ever agreed to by the other two parties.
That's true, but be that as it may, I mean, the point of that exercise is to go and listen to the people, and the people have said very clearly, there's a good deal of ambivalence about it, a good deal of debate needs to be done. But the whole point of that division is that we should be having this debate on a province-wide basis. We shouldn't be doing it in little nooks and crannies around the province and in little meetings that most British Columbians aren't part of.
Frank, do you have a comment on that?
Well, I think we are having a province-wide debate. The fact of the matter is that the recent Gallup polls indicate that the majority of British Columbians, one, support the view that there should be treaties with Aboriginal peoples, and number two, the majority of British Columbians support the Nisga'a treaties. I don't see any widespread indication of support for a view otherwise. I think more deeply, though, we can make this argument that only 38% of the people supported the government of British Columbia. You can make this argument that there seems to be no difference, according to you, between a political party and the government of British Columbia. What's the implication that every major issue that comes before the government of British Columbia should be put to referendum? Why do you pick this issue?
Okay, you know what? We're going to go back to the lines, because I know that the answer to that question is going to come out through the evolution of the debate, and people really want to talk about this. Christopher in Souk, it's your turn.
Hello there.
Hi, go ahead.
Hi there. Yeah, I worked for Aboriginal Relations at Transport and Highways in '95. My research delved into the terms of union, 1860s, and our deal with Canada. Now, apparently all the financial obligations, treaty negotiations, and all of this involvement is a Canadian burden. It is their tax responsibility, and federal authorities should be making decisions, entering into treaties, and earning their pay, rather than obfuscating, delaying, and leaving people hanging until we get into a sort of war situation between 1,500 native groups and one government that can't take responsibility.
And you're talking about the feds primarily.
Well, unfortunately, there are a lot of cash-hungry interlopers in this province who refuse to deal with the law as it stands on the books. And that includes the entire provincial government that has no legal authority to negotiate on behalf of us or natives.
Well, thank you for that. And of course, the federal government does have primary responsibility, and yet it does seem like, I mean, even right now in the argument, we're talking about the provincial government. It is the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs primarily responsible. You can start this time, Frank.
Well, I think that the caller makes a good point, that the federal government does have primary responsibility here. However, the lands and some of the financial and other implications clearly touch upon the interest of British Columbians as British Columbians.
Right.
And there's a need to have the government of British Columbia at the negotiating table, and there's a need to have it
well,
to be
the
a party
Crown
to this
lands
process.
are the responsibility of the province, not the federal. And actually, I'd like you to answer the part about the cash-hungry interlopers. The Aboriginal negotiation industry in this country has really taken off.
Well, I think that's the regrettable part of the whole thing. A lot of people have been feeding off the system, and that's regrettable. But let's make no mistake, BC contributes 100% of the land, and the self-government provisions particularly that are being proposed here, that, by the way, we voted against in the referendum on the Charlottetown Accord.
And so did the Aboriginal
and
people.
so did the Aboriginal people. They're going to be
form.
enshrined into the Constitution for the first time ever in Canada, the only treaty in Canada, and most of the powers at stake are provincial powers, about 16 different powers that will be shared by the federal and provincial governments with the Nisga'a people.
Okay, and I know that we could actually argue about whether or not it's going to be enshrined in the Constitution, but we have to take a break, and so we'll have to keep these points going, and we'll be back with more of your calls on the Nisga'a deal and the referendum question.
Tayamshi is brought to you in part by Metro Lexus Toyota, leaders in customer satisfaction.
Breaker, breaker, 19. This is Frosty Dog. Come back. You got your ears on? Well, listen up. I got 40 bushels of eatings on my back, bringing it on home in time to cut the cake. I'm on a mission in full emotion lotion, stroking more straight through the dark time because Big Daddy's looking to pull a bug in my drain. Lang Doodle done beating the bushes, looking to bust old Double Nickel, and I'm rolling trouble in the hammer lane. So I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Come back. Gonna stop, rest him up, see a man about a horse.
The Eaton's Trans-Canada sale. The best deals of the season store-wide. Eaton's. We're working on it.
News that can change your life right now. You'll want a copy of the lecture. The inspiration.
Pleased to meet you. Hope you get mine. You don't need no
Rock 101. Less talk, more classic rock.
Today we're talking about the Nisga'a deal and referendums. Our guest is Martin Brown from the Citizens' Voice and Professor Frank Cassidy, who is with Public Administration at UVic, both of them having followed this issue. Martin Brown, in his last life, I have to tell you this, was with the Reform Caucus, and actually I've known Martin Brown in his previous incarnations, so they should know that. Now we're going to show you very quickly the area of land in question, because one of the callers raised that, and we do have a map for you. And this is where it is. Now I call this West Central BC, because people from the north say this is not the north. This is more or less the Central Coast. You can see where Prince Rupert is, New Ayash, and there are 4 villages within the gray area that is part of the agreement in principle, not a treaty, but the land in question. And we're going to go back to the phones. I know what you want to say. I know what you want to say. Let's talk to Mary now from Main Island. Hi, Mary.
Hi.
Hi, go ahead.
I think the massiveness of this treaty should frighten most British Columbians. First, it's going to set a precedent. The government did not campaign on this issue. The fact that it was, so to speak, on the table was neither here nor there. It wasn't campaigned on it. Glenn Clark does not speak for me, and as far as Gallup polls getting my opinion, I have never been called by one, nor do I know anyone who has ever been phoned by one.
So clearly you want the public to have some say.
They must have some say. This is going to set a precedent for British Columbia for now and ever.
Okay.
And it's far too vast to have it go like the Alcan deal, where the people of British Columbia, even though 99% don't know about it, are going to be paying extra for that deal through BC Hydro.
Yeah, I wish we had more. I would like a referendum on that Alcan deal.
I sure
I don't
would
think it would
too.
get very far. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Thank you very much for that call. I'm glad that you raised that as a comparison, because I think that is a deal that does need to see a little more light of day. It requires a lot of research.
And I'm glad the caller raised the question of the opinion polls, because the latest Angus Reid poll shows that the support for Nisga'a is not there. In fact, the majority oppose it. And I might add, we did a poll, 71% of the people in this province want a referendum on this deal.
But it has to be a deal where people know the details. What I would be concerned about is that it becomes a referendum like what you see in the United States, where only people with money get to be part of the discussion.
But Judy, why should Aboriginal people be any more capable of making up that decision than anyone else? Why should they be having a referendum on their treaties, as they should, and we assume that they're able to figure it out and they're able to make reasoned judgments, but the rest of us are somehow too stupid?
Well,
That's insulting.
Let me ask, I'm going to bring Frank Cassidy into this. If you're sitting down negotiating at a table, as in the Nisga's case, it's been over 100 years, what do you think in terms of good faith, bad faith bargaining if you don't know ahead of time that it's going to be subject to a vote?
Oh, I think there's a real question here. We have to really put this in human terms. The Nisga'a started once again. The Nisga'a have been pursuing this issue since before the beginning of the 20th century. In the late 1960s, they brought this before the Supreme Court of Canada. They went to the negotiating table in 1977. There's a whole generation of Nisga'a men and women who have negotiated this arrangement without any discussion, and I might say when the social credit government was in power, without any discussion also. of the idea of a referendum.
Right. I think that's something that we all need to recognize. I mean, I feel very strongly that the people who want to have input, I respect that very much, but we have to, we have to go back.
Judy, I would like us at one point to focus on a question, though, which is why this issue?
Why this issue?
Why not
because this issue,
why
as you
not
know,
other
Frank,
issues?
This issue affects the fundamental constitutional rights of all of us. Do you want to have treaties, for example, that deny non-Aboriginal residents living on Nisga'a lands, subject to Nisga'a laws and property taxes, they won't even have the right to vote or run for office? Is that an appropriate model for Native treaties around this province and 60 other self-government agreements possibly? I don't think so.
I don't think that that's a factual representation,
well,
first of all, what's in the Nisga'a agreement in principle, but why this issue? Did you think there should have been a
constitutional rights of all of us?
Okay, and I think that's where we have a serious debate, because some people say it doesn't affect constitutional rights, it's more like a strata council, but we have Jack from Abbotsford who wants to be part of the debate. Go ahead, Jack. Well, Jack's from Victoria. Well, I've got Fred from Abbotsford. Hi, Fred.
Hi, Judy. How are you?
Go ahead.
Did you know?
You've got a delay, so you have to listen to your phone, not your TV.
Yeah, Judy, did you know that the negotiator for the Nisga'a, Mr. Gosnell is his name there, he stated publicly, I'm from Terrace actually, I'm just down here, stuck here for a while until we can go back to Terrace.
Well, welcome to the show then.
Which is the prime area. And this guy has publicly stated that he does not want any public knowledge of what type of deal they're going to cut. He just wants to cut a deal and make sure none of us know about it. There's an MLA named Mike Scott who's been working his butt off up there trying to get this jar of worms open so that way we can kind of have open forums on it. But it hasn't publicly been done enough down here to get everybody involved, because that little bit of land that we're looking at, which is quite a bit of timber and quite a bit of resources, if it's not publicly properly managed, and it's been done for the last 30 years, it's been managed good. But now the whole can of worms that can be opened up by giving them this right, the president is going to set, we might as well not pay taxes anymore, we might as well just go and sit on the beach like everybody else does.
Okay, well, sit on the beach. Okay, thanks, Fred. I'm going to let both of you answer.
Let me say, first of all, I'll go you one better. Chief Gosnell suggested not long ago on a radio show with me that there should be, in fact, a national referendum on this deal, which in principle we wouldn't have a problem with, given it does affect constitutional rights. But I said to him, are you simply saying you're against a referendum if you think you can't win it, but if you think you can win it, you don't have a problem with it? He had a problem with that one, and I think that's the fundamental reality here. The people who don't want a referendum are afraid they can't win it.
Frank, is there secrecy?
I just think we need to get at some of the facts here. I spoke to Chief Gosnell about that. He did not say that it should be on this deal. He said that in jest, perhaps there should be a national referendum if you're going this far on the Nisga'a deal, on Aboriginal treaties.
He said it 3 times.
In general.
3 times.
But he didn't say it was on this deal. Let's just get the facts straight here when we debate this important issue. I think there's another issue too, is I don't see that this deal is going to fundamentally change the constitutional rights of Canadians. What this deal is doing is for the first time giving Aboriginal people a real stake in this country, one that's based upon their consent.
Okay, and I think it's interesting. None of us are Aboriginal and we're having this debate, and I'm really sorry. I should let you know we really tried to have an Aboriginal person here. Most of them feel that they're too close to a negotiation that's going on, and it was we couldn't get someone to speak. So we're all going to talk about how it affects all of us, and we're going to let you know how you can get more information. If you'd like to contact the Citizens' Voice, you can do it, P.O. Box 48478, Bentall Centre, Vancouver, BC, V7X 1A2. They have a 1-900 number, which is 1-900-565-1122. Email is cvoice@msn.com. And if you want more information on the government's position, you can contact the Honourable John Kishore, the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs at the Parliament Buildings, Victoria, BC, V8V 1X4. And we are now going to take a break and be back with more of your calls on the Nisga'a deal.
What does it take to make tap water taste like this? Very little. The ingenious Brita water filter virtually eliminates lead and chlorine. Brita, water the way nature intended.
What a combination. Crunchy Werther's toffee and delicious milk chocolate. I keep one bag in the car, one on my desk, one in the living room, and one next to my bed.
Now that's where there's quality.
Nothing but the best for my guests. It's going to be a nice evening.
Werther's Chocolates. It's brand new. The crunchy kind of Werther's toffee and luscious milk chocolate. Werther's Chocolates, the crunchy luxury.
I start on them right after breakfast.
Breaker, breaker, 1-9. This is Frosty Dog. Come back. You got your ears on? Well, listen up. I got 40 bushels of eatins on my back, bringing it on home in time to cut the cake. I'm on a mission in full emotion lotion, stroking more straight through the dark time because Big Daddy's looking to pull the plug in my drain. Lang Doodle done beating the bushes, looking to bust old Double Nickel, and I'm rolling trouble in the hammer lane. So I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Come back. Gonna stop, rest him up, see a man about a horse.
The Eaton's Trans-Canada sale. The best deals of the season store-wide. Eaton's. We're working on it.
This could change your life right now. You'll want a copy of them. It's inspiration.
Pleased to meet you. Hope you get my.
Rock 101. Less talk, more classic rock.
It's here where you can't relax. Tuesday nights, Action Heroes. Big screen air action with Jag. The compelling Michael Hayes. And when it's too much for the cops, Della Ventura. It's here Tuesdays. Check TV.
Our question of the day, should the government hold a referendum to get voter approval before settling native land claims? Here's what some of you said.
Do you think that the government should go to the voters and hold some kind of referendum on land claims before they make a deal?
I think that'd be a great idea if everybody got together and how everybody had an opportunity to speak their piece and speak their mind and see what the public thinks, because a lot of this is going to cost us tax dollars, and I'd like to very much have a say on how things go as an individual.
I think we should have a say in what's going on.
I think that the people should have a choice on where the land is divvying up, and not government shouldn't have total control over their decision, because it would tend to be probably biased in their favor.
So many different opinions, and I don't think anybody knows a good answer.
They've been waiting a long time for land claims, haven't they? So I think that they should go ahead with them.
And because our gentlemen here are fairly feisty, we're going to take about 3 comments in a row, and then we're going to let them go after each other again. And we're going to start with Maria from Victoria. And Maria, thank you for being the first Aboriginal person to participate in this debate.
Hello.
Hi, go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to what Martin said about everyone should have a right to have a say in what's happening with the land claims.
Right.
And from what I know of my own history, I'm only 32 years old, and a lot of the land that was given to the non-Aboriginal people who were first moving to the peninsula,
right,
it was just given to them at the hands of my great-grandparents. There was never ever any money exchanged. People were looking for a place to live, so they just gave them places to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to comment too also on what he said about, he thinks that what he said about being dumb or something, about not being able to make negotiations work or whatever. I think that it's not a matter of being dumb. I think that everyone who's sitting on the panel is very smart, and that they're all trying to think about what's in the best interest. But the Native people, I wouldn't go up to Terrace and say, you guys shouldn't do this, because not all Aboriginal people are the same. We don't all have the same goals.
Okay.
For each nation is different, so you have to handle it from territory to territory.
Well, thank you very much for that perspective. And I should clarify, I don't think it was someone on our panel who made a comment about not being able to handle government. It was a caller, and we did take exception to that. And we'll talk to Brenda from Victoria now. I'm going to let the panel answer your question in a minute. And we'll talk to Brenda now from Victoria. Hi, Brenda.
Hi, Judy.
Hi.
Hi, Frank.
Hi.
I feel that this whole issue is blown right out of proportion. Like, I come from the Gitsan-Wet'suwet'en territory.
Which is also in the north.
Yes, right next door to the Nisga'a.
Right.
And our claim is a hell of a lot bigger than the Nisga'a. So you can start sweating bullets right now.
Well, I think that a lot of us are scared about that because, first of all, none of us have an opportunity to ever participate in something on that magnitude, and secondly, we're worried that 50 years from now, if our kids go live up there, that they will be shut out of the process.
I don't think so. The people that moved to our territories were welcomed with open arms. They were given lands, they were given food, so they won't starve.
Okay.
That's how they got started in our territories.
Okay, well, thank you for that perspective, Brenda. And we'll take one more, and then we'll have your comments on this. Oh, not that one. We want to talk to John in Abbotsford. Hi, John.
Hello.
Hi, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if they should go to a referendum, as far as I'm concerned. And after all, they get all that money and everything else. Are they going to come back to the taxpayers?
Okay, that's a good question. This deal is supposed to be final, but now you've got 3 different callers to respond to. You guys haven't been that quiet through the whole show.
Well, I'll be magnanimous and let Frank go first.
Just so you can sock them later.
That's right. Well, let's look at the question of the referendum. I think there's something to be said about the Nisga'a deal that we shouldn't lose sight of, but I think we can see it in our calls here. What would a referendum do? Experience with referenda show that they tend to polarize public opinion. They're not neutral. They don't simply register public opinion. They tend to polarize public opinion. And I really question whether in British Columbia we need to polarize or should polarize public opinion around the Aboriginal land issue, given some of the things that mark our province in the past and Canada indeed in general. And then I guess, secondly, I would say that I don't think anybody is arguing against a democratic consideration of the Nisga'a Treaty. The best question is, what is the best way to democratically consider this treaty? And I would compare a referendum to instant democracy. And I would say a referendum has about as much to do with real democracy as instant coffee does with real coffee.
Okay, that's quite a speech. Your turn, Martin.
Well, Frank, I'm sorry you have such contempt for direct democracy, and that's the difference.
This is his reformers.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, I think there's a whole bunch of people out there that very much want the opportunity to
I didn't say anything about direct democracy. I said I would compare a referendum.
That's what a referendum is.
Well, what about speaking to the bipolar?
Hang on a sec, Judy. A referendum is an opportunity to make up your own mind and have a direct vote, as opposed to having a politician cast a vote, and maybe not on your behalf. A referendum is what we used in the Charlottetown Accord, and I think it worked very well. The people, maybe you supported the deal, I didn't, and I think it worked very well for us. But above all, it allows the people to decide at the end of the day what's right and what's wrong, and this is a blueprint that we're all going to have to live with. And in order to get the legitimacy for the process, we have to know we have the people behind it,
well,
and we
don't
have
let me ask you
that
this,
right
though,
now.
Martin, because I was on the no side of the referendum, the Charlottetown Accord. I campaigned against the Charlottetown Accord, but what I am upset about is that once the deal was gone, there was no mechanism to put in place all the things, because I heard the public say the same thing over and over. We want this constructive thing, we want renewal, we want all these changes. And here we are all these years later, we've gotten nowhere. And
well, that's not quite true. In fact, a third of that Charlottetown Accord, as you well know, was on this very issue, and it's being implemented behind our backs through the treaty process without our say.
But let's come back to that in a second, Judy, because you're asking a good question. What is the alternative?
And that's what we need to talk about. Okay, we're going to be back after a quick break with more of your calls and more debate on the Nisga'a deal and the referendum question.
Introducing new Air Crisps, a whole new kind of snack pumped up with tiny pockets of air with the favorite taste of Ritz. Baked thin and crispy in 4 famous tastes. New Air Crisps, snacks pumped up.
Gary, it's time I taught you something every man should know. How to eat an Oreo cookie. Twist it off. Just give it a lick. Now you just learn to tie your shoelaces and you'll be all set.
Only Oreo.
Now you don't have to clean your dishes twice. Introducing new Electrosol automatic dishwasher tabs. It's a perfectly measured 2-layered tablet that dissolves completely. The blue layer breaks up stuck-on foods. The white layer gently scrubs your dishes till they shine, giving you dishes that look like this the first time. New Electrosol tabs, the next dimension of clean.
Luxottica Eyewear. What do you want people to see?
I want you to see a student and a teacher.
I want you to see how beautiful the word mom can sound. See refinement.
I want you to see how silly I'd feel in rhinestones.
I want you to see the older I get, the smarter my dad gets.
I want you to see a great-looking guy.
I'd like you to see me.
Luxottica Eyewear. Let them see you. To find Luxottica Eyewear, call 1-888-LUXOTTICA.
Welcome to the ocean. Dreams last for so long.
Start your workday with 98 minutes of music commercial-free.
You'll be blessed.
The Ocean, FM 98.5.
I'm everything I am because you loved me. I only want to be with you.
Victoria's at-work choice, The Ocean.
Listen.
And it's too bad you can't hear the debate going on during the commercials, but they've managed to stay somewhat restrained, and we're going to go back to the lines, try to get as many calls as possible. Leanna from North Vancouver, it's your turn.
Just a couple of comments that I wanted to make.
Sure.
As myself, I am a First Nations person.
Okay.
And I just wanted to say that a referendum was not held when we as First Nations people were stuck on reserves.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Put in boarding schools.
Yeah.
Now, to the caller who referred to us as being dumb.
Well, he didn't say that. Now we have to be careful. What he said was that there was evidence that there was some mismanagement.
Yeah,
but you never had a chance. So
Now, I just wanted to say that Canada, as a whole, is in a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, there's a good point.
You know, we as First Nations people couldn't do any worse a job.
Well, that's an excellent point.
I mean, no one is going to know how well we can do as First Nations people if we're not given an equal opportunity to prove ourselves.
Thank you very much, Leanne. I think that's a very articulate statement. I don't know why I'm laughing. Canada's in rough shape. Yeah, that's really funny.
And let me first say that, I mean, make no mistake, we support the notion of the treaty process, fully support existing legal Aboriginal rights. And we recognize.
Would you campaign in favor of treaty settlements if there were a referendum?
Well, treaty settlements.
Like if
broadly,
there was a referendum, would you say we must sign treaties?
Yeah, sure. If it was a treaty I could live with. I wouldn't campaign in favor of this Nisga'a deal because I think it's fundamentally flawed. But I would like nothing better than to see a treaty that I could live with and that would be a model for other treaties in BC.
Okay, Frank, quickly before next call.
Well, I think it needs to be said that there are hundreds of examples around British Columbia where Aboriginal people, despite the parts of the Indian Act which make it very difficult for them to do so, are pursuing self-government in a very democratic way.
Well, the Seashell Band are a good example.
There's probably more examples of direct democracy in a lot of Aboriginal communities than there are in non-Aboriginal communities in British Columbia. Not that citizens don't want it, but citizens are having more of an opportunity to do that. That means community meetings, it means talking to one another. It doesn't mean polarizing people by having referenda.
Okay, Peter from Salt Spring, it's your turn.
Okay, in regards to the land deals with the First Nations, the word treaty means giving up First Nations rights to something that was originally theirs but was taken away without compensation.
Okay.
The Treaty Commission is the proper agency to deal with this. Like it or not, this is the process of government.
Okay, I think that's a very strong point. And let's take another call. That was I mean, he's basically talking about government, not parties. Let's talk to Mavis now in Victoria. Hi, Mavis.
Hi, Judy. I just wanted to say that I think the question of whether we should have a referendum, the reason why we shouldn't have one, has certainly been demonstrated by some of your calls today by people's total lack of what it's all about. It takes a long time to get to understand the history of First Nations in this country, what has happened to them, and also to get to know what their hopes and the possibilities are.
Okay.
Your guest has said that the public hasn't had a chance. Well, I know that in the northern part of BC there have been around 200 public consultations and public information meetings, and there have been more since then. I went to one here at UVic, and it was not well attended. People really didn't turn out well.
I think that's an excellent point to make.
Find that out.
Okay.
And the other thing is, we would have, if we have a national referendum, can you imagine trying to educate the people, say, down in Nova Scotia or in Quebec or whatever,
where their
about
stakes are.
the Nisga'a agreement? It's just ridiculous. And why they want a referendum is because they figure most people don't know enough and they would vote no. They don't want the treaty out of fear.
Okay.
And I think that's what I want to say.
Okay, thank you, Mavis. Two things, I guess, then. The lack of attendance on the public process that has existed is important, but the other caller who talked about the process of government, and then we had Leanna from North Van saying the Aboriginal people didn't ever get a chance to vote, in fact, till the mid-60s, on anything that happened to them. So how come now we're taking exception with the process of government when it was okay for government to do what they were doing before without...
Because two wrongs don't make a right. Quite frankly, these treaties are supposed to be replacing the existing inequities. They shouldn't be creating new inequities. And the consultation that has gone on, albeit there's been more in recent years, but for example, the primary body that advises the provincial government, the third parties, labor groups and business groups, etc., it's a group called the Treaty Negotiation Advisory Committee. The last main table meeting it had was last April. They're meeting as we speak today. They haven't had a meeting for 6 months on this deal as it's moved forward. Quietly, what the heck has happened? We think that there hasn't been the consultation, and we don't fear direct democracy, and I think it's insulting to suggest to those of us who want to vote that we automatically oppose treaties in general.
Okay, Frank.
Well, I think we should have a lot of confidence in British Columbians. I think people will and do realize the basic question that's at stake here. I don't think the basic question really revolves around referenda, and I don't think it should be made to revolve around referenda. The basic question is a question about what did we do as Canadians to Aboriginal people, and how should we set that right?
Okay.
And the way to set that right is through the treaty process, and that's what we're doing. And we have to keep that in mind, what's happened in the past and how to set the table for the future.
And we have to take a break, and we'll be back with more calls, and we're talking about the Nisga'a deal and the referendum question.
What does it take to make tap water taste like this? Very little. The ingenious Brita water filter virtually eliminates lead and chlorine. Brita, water the way nature intended.
This can change your life right now. You want a copy of it? But the inspiration.
Pleased to meet you. Hope you get mine.
Rock 101. Less talk, more classic rock.
It's here, where friends drink water from the tap.
I don't know if you're aware of this, Vince, but there's a man outside who isn't wearing any pants.
Sometimes in New York, it's the closest thing you can get to a smile.
Union Square. It's here, Thursday.
You know it's a jungle up there. The Better Business Bureau offers you protection in today's business jungle. They handle consumer gripes and groans, offer mediation, arbitration, and inform the public about unscrupulous businesses. Look for the sign of BBB membership acceptance and check with your Better Business Bureau of Vancouver Island.
What will the future hold in store for you? Will you ever find happiness, love, romance? When and where will you meet your true mate? What will your mate look like? Will they be faithful, loving, and caring? Will you have good fortune or bad? Will you have good health or bad? Give a gift to yourself and find the answers. Talk to our gifted psychics for your personal reading. Call now, 1-900-677-3311.
Coming up in the next few shows, we're going to be talking about forestry jobs, runaways, and parental rights when it comes to runaways, alternative health care, and then we will have part 2 in our Constitution series coming up next week. And we're going to try to take 4 calls in a row, and then we will let our gentleman here finish the discussion. Let's talk to Michael first in Richmond. Hi, Michael.
Hi. Just calling to find out, what is the big deal about referendums? Like, the land that we're on, it's all like borrowed land anyway. And, it's like, if I was still supposed to go and live on the gentleman's property, Mr. Brown or whatever his name is, Is he going to have a referendum to get me off of it, or, what is the problem there?
Oh, okay, and I will let him answer that in a sec. And now we'll talk to Darren in Chemainus. Hi, Darren.
Hi, I've got a rather interesting perspective on a lot of things. I'm a non-native, however, I'm married to a native lady.
Okay.
I'm the father of 6 native children, and we live on the reserve.
Okay.
And my consensus, as far as the Nisga'a deal goes, is from everybody I've talked to, like all my friends, my whole realm of being is all with native people, and they all feel that the Nisga'a gave up too much.
That's interesting.
They did. And I agree with them. Being married to a native lady and going into Nanaimo, like we live on the Chemainus Indian Reserve, I see the prejudice, the way that she's treated, differently, and they're not given equal opportunity, even now. And the native people are becoming more and more educated all the time. Right. And they're becoming more intelligent, but they're not given equal opportunity. And as far as this referendum goes, that it's ludicrous to have one, because look at the way the white people outnumber the native people now, and the white people aren't going to give up what they took many years ago.
Okay, well, thank you for those comments, and we'll let the panel answer that in a sec. We'll talk to Jack now in Courtenay. Hi, Jack.
Hi.
Hi. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I want to vote
Okay.
on it. I think we should have a referendum.
Okay.
And these people that said, we did bad about the natives. How about the schools we built for them? The hospitals, the roads, the houses. And not far from where I live right now, my tax dollars have built a longhouse for them. I've been lived over 60 years, and I haven't got a thing from the government yet. So I want to vote on this. And that fellow that's with the professor that said that we haven't had a war, well, I'll tell him what I did, the chief that said that. Let's get the bloody thing on then.
Okay, well, that's fairly provocative and fairly opinionated. Now let's take a last call. Jane from Vancouver. Hi, Jane.
Hello.
Hi, go ahead.
My concern is, at the beginning of the century, there was trading with the natives from other countries other than Canada and other than the Hudson's Bay Company. And I'm just wondering, with this land settlement, would these people become like normal Canadians paying normal taxes?
Okay. Okay, well, you've raised some good points. Now that's, boy, you got half an hour to answer those questions. So let's start with this, Martin. They were all over. What's the problem? The Nisga'a maybe gave up too much. Are we prepared to go to war with the Aboriginal people? And what about tax status?
Well, for starters, I don't think it serves anyone's interest to have that kind of heated rhetoric, and that's not our intention, certainly. But I do think it begs the question, what are we doing this for? We're doing it for 2 reasons, as I see it. We need treaties. Number one, to provide compensation for past injustices, and I don't have a problem with that. The government doesn't call it compensation anymore. They should. But the other reason is to provide certainty and equality, greater equality, greater certainty for all British Columbians. We should be breaking down these barriers. We shouldn't be carving our province up into 60 segregated, culturally distinct territories that each have powers we wouldn't even give Quebec, for heaven's sakes. That, to my mind, is not the way that we should be proceeding. We should be trying to make British Columbians more equal, with equal rights and equal opportunities.
Okay, Frank.
Well, I think we have to put things in context. Do Aboriginal peoples face equal conditions, and do they have equal opportunities in British Columbia now? No.
No.
There are historical reasons why we're at the treaty table. There are legal reasons why we're at the treaty table. What I haven't heard is any alternative to what is actually going on right now.
Any alternative to the Treaty Commission process?
No, what I haven't heard is any alternative to the current treaty. How can we go about and deal with these questions in an honest way that reflects the possibilities for the future and the history of Canada and the legal obligations of government?
And
remember, government is not at the table here because it's very kind or because there was somebody that had some far-fetched notion of justice. Government's at the table because the courts told government it had to be at the table, and government is at the table because there was rising economic uncertainty in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Unless we have a viable alternative to what's happening now, and I still haven't heard any description of that kind of alternative, we'll continue to have the uncertainty, and we'll continue to have a British Columbia that's characterized by injustice.
Well, let me give you the alternative.
Well, let me just try to take one more call, and then we'll try to end on a positive note. We have Shelley from Whistler. Hi, Shelley.
Hi.
Hi, go ahead.
Yeah, what I was wondering is if a referendum is what the general public wants, can they not express that through mail, phone calls, etc., to their representatives in the provincial government, and that would be far less expensive to find out how the general public feels, and then go to a referendum.
Okay, well that's it, and that leads us to your comment
Well, indeed,
as well.
and I think the fundamental problem here is that British Columbians have never been asked what they want to see in treaties. British Columbians have never been consulted fundamentally through a province-wide debate on the types of principles and values that they want to see reflected in all the treaties that are going to be negotiated. And I think you do that. Maybe you strike a constituent assembly, keep it out of the partisan political realm, have average British Columbians go around this province, draft a mandate that is acceptable to most British Columbians and put that to a referendum and try and get a mandate to go to the bargaining table. That's never happened, and that's why the legitimacy of the process is in question right now, and why we're not having treaties that promote equality.
Okay. Now, Frank, if the government does not go to a referendum before it signs a treaty like the Nisga'a or another treaty, what do you think the consequences will be?
I think that we'll see the ratification of the treaty. And I think a lot of people will see that it's a very reasonable treaty, that both sides to the treaty, or all the different sides to the treaty, have made very significant compromises. I think we'll see the economic benefits of treaty making in British Columbia. I think we'll begin to see the light of day in terms of legal certainty. If we put aside the Nisga'a Treaty as it is now, we'll put aside 20 years of hard work to create something that's in the benefit of all British Columbians. That's not a light thing to do.
We're out of time. And my guess is this is not going to be Martin Brown from the Citizens Voice and Frank Cassidy from UVic. Thank you both very much. And if you want to get in touch with us, then you can write to us, Tyabji, 780 Kings Road, Victoria, BC, V8T 5A2, fax 250-389-1226. Email is tyabji@wic.ca, and we have a website where you can get information on this show and previous shows, and we will be back after a quick break.
The Grime Zones. They're tough, they're all over the house, and they're about to meet their match. Introducing new Stronger Mr. Clean, now with even more muscle for tough grime, like stovetop grease, mudroom muck, and kids being kids dirt. It all shines clean, because new Mr. Clean muscles under to lift off dirt faster, better than the leading pine cleaner. Mr. Clean takes the tough out of grime zones. Everywhere, new Mr. Clean shines through, even better than before.
Of all their delicate parts, tender, sensitive spots, one of the tenderest sits in a diaper all day long. While a wipe may feel soft here, you may need a gentler wipe here. Baby Fresh and Pampers made a wipe quilted thick, clinically shown to be gentler, without the coarse bits like the other leading brand. So clean with a touch just as gentle as your own. Pampers Baby Fresh. Pamper the skin they're in.
Last year, GMC introduced the special edition Whistler Blackcomb Jimmies with ski rack, Whistler Blackcomb Express cards, mountain merchandise, running boards, and a luxurious interior. This fully loaded Jimmy proved to be in a class of its own. Now the special edition Jimmy is back, and with it the new 1998 Whistler Blackcomb Safari with all-wheel drive and room for 8 adventurous souls. The Whistler Blackcomb Jimmies and Safaris, proving at last that it doesn't have to be lonely at the top.
Welcome to the ocean.
Dreams last for so long.
Start your workday with 98 minutes of music commercial-free.
You'll be blessed.
The Ocean, FM 98.5.
I'm everything I am because you love me.
I only want to be with you. Victoria's at-work choice, The Ocean.
Listen.
Could we be getting more jobs out of the same amount of wood? Some people say yes, through log salvaging and other options like horse logging. And we'll be talking about this with 2 people who practice this on tomorrow's show. And today, a very important issue, and it has to do with not only the Nisga'a deal, but whether or not we should have more public process involved in the Treaty Commission. Let me show you. This is the agreement in principle that came out that's currently under review and discussion as we speak. It has not been signed into a treaty, but something we should realize is that there is no level of trust between the Aboriginal people at the table and the government, and for good reason, after 100 years of historic problems. But I believe there should be more public involvement in how we set the terms, but at the same time we can't jeopardize the terms of reference that are already underway, because that process was started in good faith. There should be more debate, and that's healthy. I'm Judy Tyabji, and that's my opinion. What's yours?
It's here.
It's here.
It's here.
It's here. It's here.
It's here.
It's here.
It's here. It's here.
It's here.
It's here.
It's here. Check TV.
Today on Canadian Living TV, when casual Fridays at work get a little too comfy. The Great Canadian Capers. Winnipeg Today, life after the flood. Good news in men's health. And a fun birthday snake cake. Hi, welcome to Canadian Living TV. I'm Samantha Houston. Most big companies have a casual Friday policy. One day